41 minutes. Say that number back to me, Ms. Cole, so I know you understand what it costs. She thinks a badge means she runs this building. Marcus, the motorcade is alive right now. Ask her how she knew. Ha ha, the badge is government property, sweetheart. Security will walk you out. Cardboard suits you, Renata. Everyone. Situation room, now. Ma'am, this is the United States Secret Service. The director is 9 minutes out. She's coming here personally for the staffer who caught the breach. Which staffer? The one you just fired. Hold that number, 41 minutes. Because in a few seconds you're going to watch a woman carry a cardboard box past every person who spent 3 years pretending she didn't matter. And none of them will know yet that the director of the Secret Service is already in the car. 21 days before that parking lot, a scheduling assistant nobody in the West Wing could name filed a memo that got thrown in the trash in front of 40 people. What she did with the next 41 minutes of her life would end 2 careers on the same floor she used to be invisible on. Stay with me, because the woman holding that box is about to find out exactly what she's worth, and so is the man who fired her. Comment where you're watching from, drop a like, and let's rewind to the memo nobody wanted to read. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Renata Cole had worked inside the White House complex for 11 years. 4 presidents had occupied the Oval Office during that time, if you counted the acting weeks. Renata had outlasted every single one of their chiefs of staff but one, and she was about to outlast him too, though not in the way anyone expected on a Tuesday morning in early spring. She was 44 years old. Deputy Director of Presidential Scheduling and Advance Operations, a title long enough that most people just called her the scheduling woman and moved on with their day. She kept the president's minute-by-minute calendar, coordinated with Secret Service on movement logistics, and cross-checked every public appearance against threat assessments that came in from 6 different agencies. It was invisible work. It was also, if you understood what it protected, some of the most consequential work in the building. Nobody in the West Wing press shop would have admitted that. Everybody who had ever needed a motorcade route changed in the middle of the night learned it fast. Renata had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment outside Cleveland, the daughter of an Air Force loadmaster and a woman who did contract translation work for the Department of Defense. Her mother had a gift most people never noticed until it saved them. She could read a room, a document, a face, for the one detail that didn't belong. She died when Renata was 26, 6 years into Renata's own career as an imagery analyst for a 3-letter agency most people only knew from movies. Before the funeral, Renata's father handed her a small leather notebook that had belonged to her mother. Inside the cover, in careful handwriting, were 4 words: "Notice what changes." Renata carried that notebook in her bag every day for 18 years. She'd stopped writing new entries in it around year 12. She never stopped reading the old ones. She left the agency after 8 years. Burned out, she told people, though the truth was closer to disillusioned, and took the West Wing job because a former colleague vouched for her and because, in her own words, somebody competent should be in the room when the schedule gets made. Nobody in that building knew what she used to do for a living. They knew she was thorough to the point of exhausting, that she double-checked things that didn't need double-checking, and that she rarely spoke unless she had something worth saying. In a building built on the opposite instinct, that made her strange. Home was a modest brick colonial in Alexandria, and a husband named Desmond Cole, 47, a structural engineer who inspected bridges for the state of Virginia and had a laugh that filled a room without trying. Desmond was steady in the way good infrastructure is steady. You don't think about it until the day you need it to hold, and then you're grateful someone built it right. He packed her lunch most mornings because she forgot to eat if he didn't, and he never once asked her to explain the years she wouldn't talk about. There were things about those years that the White House staff did not know. A small enameled pin in her desk drawer that she never wore and never explained. The way she read a printed schedule the way most people read a stop sign, once, completely, without needing to look again. A framed, unmarked satellite photograph on her office wall that visitors assumed was decorative. Renata let them assume. 8 years of her working life sat inside that frame, silent and precise. She had learned something in those years about the way people reacted to competence they didn't understand. Some people saw a resource. Others saw a threat. Marcus Thorne saw threats everywhere and value nowhere, unless the value had his name attached to it. Marcus Thorne was 59, silver-haired, expensively tailored, and 2 years into his tenure as White House Chief of Staff. He had come from a decade running a political consulting firm where his specialty was narrative management, a polite term, people in the building said privately, for making problems disappear from the story rather than from reality. He had a talent for filling a room with his own certainty and a habit of treating dissent as a personality flaw in the person offering it. On the corner of his desk sat a small brass plaque, a gift from his last consulting client. It read, "Perception is the product." He ran the West Wing communications apparatus the way he'd run every campaign before it. Optics first, substance negotiable, and he called the approach discipline. Beside him, always positioned one careful step ahead of the org chart, stood Vanessa Kessler, 40, Deputy Director of Communications. She had a gift for language, and an even sharper gift for knowing exactly which door to be standing behind at exactly the right time. She had not personally drafted a briefing memo in over a year, but she could kill one in a single meeting with a raised eyebrow. Her black SUV appeared in Thorne's reserved parking space more mornings than made sense for two people who, according to the official org chart, had no reason to arrive together. A hot mic during a prep call had once caught him calling her babe for 4 full seconds before someone cut the feed. Nobody laughed. Everybody remembered. 3 times over the preceding 8 months, Renata had filed the same memo. It requested a standing pre-clearance review of any last-minute route change to a presidential motorcade, a formal, 24-hour security buffer between a schedule change and its execution, cross-checked against updated threat intelligence. She wrote it plainly. We are one clerical delay away from moving the president down a route that was flagged and later cleared for the wrong reasons. The 5 extra hours this costs us in flexibility are worth it. 3 times the memo came back, stamped the way Thorne stamped everything he considered beneath his attention. Denied. Operationally unnecessary. The 3rd time, someone had added a note in the margin, in handwriting the whole building recognized, and nobody could ever quite prove belonged to Vanessa Kessler. It read, "Cute of the scheduling department to think it runs security." Renata smoothed the page flat, folded it once, and filed it in a folder in her bottom desk drawer. She was not a sentimental woman. She was a woman who kept records. Across town, at a regional data center that handled encrypted routing information for federal motorcade logistics, a maintenance ticket sat open for 6 weeks with a low-priority flag, intermittent authentication fault, route confirmation subsystem, recommend immediate patch. Nobody with the authority to prioritize it read it twice. The ticket waited. The vulnerability waited. And 41 minutes before a motorcade would one day roll through a Tuesday morning, the waiting would end. The Monday before everything changed, Thorne held his monthly senior staff meeting in the Roosevelt Room, a space he liked for its ceilings and its cameras, the kind of room where the walls reminded you a version of history was always being made, and Thorne intended to be its author. Renata stood when the topic of the security buffer memo came up for the 4th time. She had numbers ready. Cost of a standing 24-hour pre-clearance protocol, negligible, absorbed within existing staff hours. Cost of a single compromised route reaching execution, incalculable. And she said the word slowly enough that it landed. Thorne let her finish. That was his favorite part. Letting people finish, so the room could watch him decide their point didn't matter. This is the White House, Ms. Cole, not a security consultancy. he said. "We have people for that." The room laughed, because paychecks laugh when the chief of staff makes a joke. Vanessa laughed loudest, 3 manicured claps against her folder. Thorne balled the memo in one hand and lobbed it toward the wastebasket by the coffee service. It missed, bounced off the rim, and rolled to a stop at Renata's shoes. "File that where it belongs," he said. The room went quiet the way rooms do when a joke curdles into something people will remember differently later. Renata bent, picked up the paper, and smoothed it flat against her thigh with 2 long, unhurried strokes. She folded it once and slid it into her blazer pocket like a handkerchief. She sat back down without a word. Thorne's smile flickered, barely, the way a light dims when something heavy switches on somewhere else in the building. Vanessa handled the rest her own way, which was quieter and colder. By Friday, a new staffing memo moved Renata off primary advanced logistics and onto records digitization support, the West Wing's version of counting paper clips. Her operational stipend disappeared with a single keystroke. A formal note went into her personnel file citing tone inconsistent with senior staff collaboration. When her junior colleague Priya saw the reassignment memo, she cried quietly in the break room. Renata handed her a tissue and kept sorting archive boxes like it was any other Tuesday. "You don't fight every wave," she told Priya. "You pick the one that matters, and you stand up in front of it." Even exiled to the archive room, she kept watching. On Wednesday, a routine cable came through from the interagency threat-sharing desk, the kind of low-priority notice that scrolled past most inboxes unread. Renata read it twice. A regional authentication vulnerability, the same one sitting unpatched at the routing data center, had just been flagged in an unrelated cybersecurity bulletin as actively exploited elsewhere in the sector. She forwarded it, formally, through channels, to the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations. It was logged, it was acknowledged, it was, quietly, buried under 11 other items on someone else's Friday. She kept a copy. She was not sentimental about insults. She kept records. Some evenings the weight nearly won. In her home office in Alexandria, behind a drawer of old briefing binders, sat a resignation letter Renata had drafted on a bad night 3 weeks earlier and never signed. That Thursday she took it out and read it twice. 11 years. A shredded proposal. A reassignment built to make her disappear by inches. She clicked her pen and held it over the signature line. Then she looked at the small leather notebook on her desk. Notice what changes. Her mother had never specified whose job it was to notice. That, Renata understood now, had always been the point. Desmond found her at the kitchen table an hour later. He didn't ask what the letter said. He just set his hand over hers on the table and said, "Storms don't apologize, Ren. Neither should you." She laughed for the first time in a week. She put the letter back in the drawer and went to bed early, because something in her, the old training maybe, or just instinct, told her the next day would need her rested. It was a quiet shift the following morning. The kind of quiet that people who've done this work for a long time learn not to trust. At 6:14 a.m., a secure alert crossed 3 separate monitoring feeds simultaneously, an unheard-of redundancy failure that meant either total system malfunction or something much worse. Renata, back at her old desk that morning to retrieve an archive box, saw it flash across a terminal she technically no longer had authorization to be reading. The presidential motorcade, carrying the president to a scheduled address at a manufacturing plant 40 minutes outside the city, was already moving. The originally cleared route had been altered 40 minutes earlier due to a reported water main break. A change routed through the compromised authentication subsystem without the 24-hour buffer Renata had asked for 3 times. The new route ran directly past an overpass that had been under a standing unresolved threat advisory for 11 days, an advisory that had never been cross-referenced against the reroute because the system that should have flagged it was the same system sitting on 6 weeks of unpatched vulnerability. A junior communications staffer glanced at the terminal over Renata's shoulder, and said the number out loud like it needed checking. 41 minutes until they hit that overpass. Every rule in that building told Renata to stay in her lane, stay quiet, let the review process work the way review processes were supposed to work. On the other side of that instinct stood 11 years of instinct, built somewhere else entirely, a compartment on a ship, a briefing room with no windows, a mother's handwriting that said, "Notice what changes," and never once said, "and then wait for permission." She picked up the secure line herself. She did not shout. She never had to. "This is Cole, badge 4412, override request. Motorcade route Bravo 7 is compromised. Repeat, compromised. I need Secret Service Advance and White House Communications Agency on this line in the next 90 seconds. Nobody on the floor corrected her badge number's expired clearance. Nobody had time to check. What they heard instead was a voice that didn't waver, cutting through a room that had gone very still. She pulled up the interagency cable from 3 weeks earlier, the one she'd forwarded and watched get buried, and read the vulnerability number off it like a coordinate. She pulled the 11-day-old threat advisory on the overpass. She laid both documents side by side on a shared screen so fast that the watch officer on the other end of the line, a 29-year-old Secret Service technical specialist named Halston, would later testify he'd never seen two independent threads connected that quickly by anyone, in or out of a briefing room. "Confirm my read," Renata said. "Reroute Bravo 7 crossed a live threat zone because the authentication check that should have caught it was never patched. I flagged the patch 6 weeks ago. I flagged the correlation 3 weeks ago. I am telling you now, pull the motorcade off that route in the next 4 minutes, or explain to the director why you didn't." Halston didn't hesitate. He related up the chain in the clipped, urgent cadence of a man whose entire career had trained him to move fast on incomplete information rather than slow on complete disaster. Within 90 seconds, the lead Secret Service vehicle received the override. The motorcade turned 2 minutes before it would have passed beneath the overpass. What agents recovered from that overpass 40 minutes later, after a tactical sweep authorized on Renata's flagged coordinates, would not be detailed publicly for another 11 months, for reasons of ongoing investigation. What the after-action report would eventually say, in language stripped of drama because government reports are not built for drama, was this: the altered route presented a credible and elevated risk profile that was not identified through standard protocol. The deviation was identified and reported by a staff member operating outside her assigned duties, using information she had previously and unsuccessfully attempted to escalate through normal channels. 41 minutes, start to finish. Renata Cole spent 39 of them on a phone line nobody had authorized her to use, refusing to hang up until the right people believed her. Thorne heard about the reroute after the fact, the way chiefs of staff always hear about the things that actually matter. Second-hand, in a hallway, 3 steps behind the people who did the work. His first instinct was not gratitude, it was exposure. A junior staffer with expired clearance had bypassed the entire operational chain of command and been right, publicly, in a way that would generate questions about why the 24-hour buffer she'd requested 3 times had never been implemented. He called it insubordination before he called it anything else. Vanessa arrived at his office within the hour, already building the frame. If the story is a demoted scheduling assistant saved the president, the story underneath it is senior staff ignored a security memo 3 times. We control this by making the first story about a rules violation, not a security failure. By Friday, the paperwork was ready. Unauthorized use of a decommissioned security credential. Circumvention of the chain of command. Conduct unbecoming senior White House staff. They staged the termination at the Friday morning staff huddle because Thorne understood, the way Renata's old antagonists in every hallway like this one always understood, that punishment without an audience is just paperwork, and punishment needs to be seen to do its job. He read the memo aloud himself, savoring the phrase "effective immediately." Then he asked for her badge. Renata handed it over without a word, in front of 30 of her former colleagues. Security walked her past the archive room she'd been exiled to, past the terminal where, 4 days earlier, she had spent 39 minutes keeping a motorcade off a compromised overpass. Priya started to say something with her whole chest. Renata caught her eye and shook her head. Small, final. Not this wave. Not yet. At home, Desmond took one look at her face and set the unsigned resignation letter and the termination notice side by side on the table. He asked, quietly, which one she wanted to fight. Neither, Renata said, and set her folder down beside them. The denied memos, the buried cable, the note in the margin nobody could prove belonged to Vanessa Kessler. Storms don't need help. Let this one finish building itself. Then she made dinner and slept 9 hours for the first time in a month. People who keep clean records sleep the sleep of the fully prepared. While Renata slept, the paperwork she generated in 90 frantic seconds was already climbing somewhere else entirely. The United States Secret Service does not treat a near miss on a presidential route as a Friday afternoon footnote. It treats it as an institutional failure requiring a name, a timeline, and an answer to the question every serious organization eventually has to ask: who caught this, and why wasn't it their job? The after-action review reached the desk of Director Adayeze Osei within 4 days. Osei was 58, 29 years into a Secret Service career that started on a protective detail and ended for now in the corner office. She had one operating principle she'd carried the whole way. You can replace equipment. You cannot replace the person who thinks past the checklist. She read the report twice. The second read stopped her on a single line, identified and reported by a staff member operating outside her assigned duties, using information she had previously and unsuccessfully attempted to escalate through normal channels. Osei had her office place a call to the White House Chief of Staff's line to request the staffer's name for a formal commendation. A polished voice on the other end promised a callback. It never came. A second call 3 days later met the same fate. An email requesting the duty log from that morning went unanswered for a week, because Vanessa Kessler had decided that acknowledging Renata Cole's role would validate the story they were still, quietly, trying to bury. Osei did what people like her have always done when a door won't open through normal means. She stopped knocking and picked up the phone to her own general counsel. Pull every routing log, every original memo Cole filed, every denial stamp, and the internal cable from 3 weeks prior, Osei said. Certify it. I want her full name and service history on my desk by Thursday. The name came back attached to a service record that made Osei sit back slowly in her chair. 8 years with a federal intelligence agency, an imagery analysis specialty with a classified commendation attached, followed by 11 years, unbroken, in a White House scheduling office that had apparently never once asked what she used to do for a living. Osei reached for her calendar with the expression of someone correcting an accounting error the size of a career. Get my car, she told her aide, and get the president's detail lead. We're going in person. 21 days after the trash can, 2 things were sitting on Marcus Thorne's desk. The first was a press statement he never got to send, framing the reroute as a routine security protocol working exactly as designed. The second was a termination file, closed and complete, that Vanessa had assured him was airtight. He had never once in his career needed convincing to move fast when someone beneath him became inconvenient. You already know what that morning looked like from the inside. The light through the windows, a shredder finishing off a badge with 11 years behind it, a banker's box waiting in the hallway before the meeting even started. Gauze suits you. Cardboard suits you. Security will walk you out. A room called together for what Thorne believed was good news. What the rest of the building felt was different. It felt like an institution holding its breath, while the 2 people running its narrative drank their own certainty. And then a name over the phone, and then 11 chairs scraping back in the Situation Room. and then a chief of staff sprinting through his own parking lot. Thorne came through the West Wing's lower lobby doors at a dead run just as a black government sedan pulled up to the curb. The timing arranged itself with the particular cruelty of perfect coincidence. Renata, box on her hip, was 8 steps from her car. His voice hit her back and fell off it. His dress shoes slapped the wet pavement. He was actually reaching for her elbow, the elbow of the woman whose badge was, at that moment, sitting in his shredder bin. That was when the sedan's rear door opened and Director Adiaze Osei stepped out in her service jacket, flanked by 2 agents from the president's own detail. "Ms. Cole," Osei said, her voice carrying clean across the lot without effort. "Renata Cole? I was. An hour ago," Renata said. Osei's eyes moved briefly to the box, to the termination letter folded on top of a framed satellite photograph. Something crossed her face that made the 2 agents behind her go very still. "We have it from here, ma'am," one of the agents said, gently taking the box from Renata's hands. "You shouldn't have to carry your own box out of a building you just protected." Osei read the commendation citation into the March wind, and the parking lot went reverent quiet. For exceptional judgment and decisive action under time-critical conditions. For identifying and escalating a credible security vulnerability that had been repeatedly deprioritized through standard channels. For personal initiative directly credited with the prevention of a catastrophic security failure involving the motorcade of the President of the United States. The Director of the United States Secret Service awards Renata Cole the Director's Distinguished Civilian Commendation, the highest honor this agency extends to a civilian employee. The 2 agents came to attention and saluted, sharp and held. Renata stood, wet-eyed and straight-backed, in the same government blazer she'd been wearing when they took her badge an hour earlier. Behind the small formation, forgotten on the open asphalt, stood Marcus Thorne, tie askew, chest heaving, watching the United States Secret Service salute the woman he'd just fired. He assembled his practiced smile and started forward, hand extended toward Osei. That was the exact moment a second car pulled into the lot, the White House counsel's vehicle, with a courier-delivered evidence folder sitting on the passenger seat like a second passenger entirely. White House counsel Miriam Osgood was 61, a former federal prosecutor with a handshake that felt like the opening line of a deposition. She had spent her early morning reviewing a courier package from the Secret Service's General Counsel, certified routing logs, the buried interagency cable with Renata's forwarding timestamp still intact, 3 years of denied memos, and a sworn statement from Watch Officer Halston describing the fastest, cleanest security escalation of his career, run, he said, almost entirely by someone who technically wasn't supposed to be in the room. Osgood crossed the parking lot at the pace of an audit that had already reached its conclusion. Thorne stepped toward her with his hand still extended, already narrating some version of the morning in which he had personally championed the security review that caught the flaw. Director Osei cut him off without raising her voice. "I called your office twice, Mr. Thorne. Both times, a very pleasant assistant promised a callback. Imagine my morning, learning what this building did to the person who prevented an attack on the president." Osgood held out her hand. Renata understood, and passed her the termination letter from the top of the box. Osgood read it once, uncapped a pen, and wrote a single word across the front, in strokes visible from 10 feet away. Void. She looked at Thorne the way a prosecutor looks at a second set of books. Emergency session, my office, 30 minutes. Bring nothing. It's already in the folder. Then she turned to Renata last, and her voice gentled into something entirely different. This administration owes you an apology considerably larger than a parking lot, Ms. Cole. The counsel's office would like to discuss exactly how you'd like it delivered. Renata looked past her, through the West Wing glass, where a knot of staffers, Priya among them, both hands pressed to her mouth, stood watching from the lobby. "I don't want anyone's office," Renata said. "I want the 24-hour buffer implemented, in writing, with my name on the protocol." And I want it read before anyone else's memo gets thrown in a trash can. The emergency session ran 3 hours, and the folder did most of the talking. IT recovery did the rest. Deleted correspondence, it turns out, only stays deleted for the person who deleted it. The recovered thread showed Osei's original outreach arriving twice, dying at the same inbox both times, alongside an internal message in which Vanessa Kessler described a federal near-miss investigation as, in her words, a narrative discipline problem. She had, in one sentence, described suppressing correspondence tied to a security incident involving the President of the United States as a communications strategy. She would learn what that sentence meant, legally, from a different lawyer very soon. Cornered, Vanessa did what people like her nearly always do. She chose the version of the truth that protected her least badly. She arrived with counsel of her own and a folder of text messages, reading them aloud in a voice built for sympathy. "Babe, make this go away before the cycle turns. Babe, the termination review is a formality. Be decisive." She explained she had acted entirely on Thorne's direction. It saved her nothing. She was terminated for cause within the week, and her conduct was referred to the Office of Special Counsel for review of potential Hatch Act and federal records violations. It cost Thorne considerably more. His resignation, when it came 4 days later, was framed by his own team as a personal decision to spend more time with family, the traditional epitaph of a Washington career that ends badly. It fooled almost no one who had watched a Secret Service director salute a fired scheduling assistant in a parking lot on live cable news within the hour. Renata came back through the West Wing's lower entrance the following Monday, not to her old desk, but to a newly created office, Senior Advisor for Security Protocol Integration, reporting directly to the Chief of Staff's successor and, unofficially, to no one who would ever again throw her memo in a trash can. Her first act was the 24-hour buffer, finally written into standing policy with her name on the authorizing document. Her second act restored every stipend and every title Thorne and Vanessa had stripped from staff who'd simply done their jobs too well. Her third act was a standing quarterly threat correlation drill, run at odd hours, coffee provided, attendance mandatory for senior staff, including whoever happened to be sitting in the Chief of Staff's chair. The commendation coin arrived that first week, in a plain envelope with no return address. It sat on her desk beside the small leather notebook that had once belonged to her mother. Notice what changes. At home on a quiet evening in Alexandria, Desmond hung a new photograph in the hallway, Director Osei's 2 agents at attention, saluting a woman in a plain government blazer, a banker's box between them. Underneath it, in Renata's own handwriting, one line, "Notice what changes." Here's the part worth taking with you. Nobody powerful rescued Renata Cole. No secret patron, no dramatic reveal of hidden influence, no miracle. She was saved by the exact things that saved a motorcade 41 minutes before it crossed a compromised overpass. Competence maintained when nobody was rewarding it. Records kept clean when nobody thought to check them. A spine that bent, briefly, for a memo on the floor, and never once broke. The people who called her replaceable needed her badge gone by 9 in the morning. The people whose safety she protected needed 39 minutes and a phone line nobody had authorized her to use. That is the arithmetic of worth. It is never written by the person holding the pen at the polished desk. It is written at 6:14 in the morning by whoever refuses to hang up the phone until the right person believes them. Titles are rented. Marcus Thorne's name came off that door within the month. Competence is owned. It walked out the front door in a cardboard box, and it came back running the protocol that protects the President of the United States. Somewhere near you is a person like that. Quiet, underestimated, carrying a skill set no one in the room has bothered to ask about, doing the check nobody notices. Until the morning, everything depends on it. Maybe you work beside her. Maybe you raised her. Maybe on the mornings the whole world has decided are unimportant, she looks back at you from the mirror before you leave for a job that doesn't yet know what you're capable of. So here's my question, and I want real answers in the comments. Who held the line for you when it mattered? And did anyone ever learn their name? Tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who's been called just the assistant, and subscribe, because the next story is already being written in some hallway right now. I keep coming back to one image, the badge in the shredder. 11 years, erased in one motion because two people upstairs decided her worth before breakfast, and it took a security director and a president's own detail to prove them wrong. I tell these stories because somewhere right now, someone in a government-issue blazer is being told she doesn't matter by people she will outlast. If that's you, keep your receipts and keep walking straight. The room that laughs today applauds tomorrow. Drop a like if you'd have made that same phone call. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single comment.